So this piece is a solid mass of glass that has been pulled into a straight line, or as straight as it can be. This body of work started from a curiosity or interest in exploring how certain materials react to certain human forces and how there's only so much that we can control, and how to accept that within itself, and how external situations also respond to our actions. So it actually started from a series of pieces that I had made, three very large-scale paintings that were attempts to making a straight line, in which I drew a straight line climbing up and down a ladder with a 4-inch brush, and each line was a recording of the movement of the synchronization of my breath and going up and down. So I had been working parallelly with glass for some years now, and my interest in this material comes from it being a documentation of actually a moment in time. So these pieces were made at a residency I had last year at a place in South Jersey in the Pine Barrens. And historically, this area was the place where the first successful glass factory in America occurred. It has a long history, but eventually that industry was transformed into a non-for-profit in the 70s. And now it's still a place where the arts exist there. But the history of how glass as a natural material comes from sand, and how through heat and temperature it can be transformed, and it consistently keeps moving through different states of matter. That's where, in those spaces in between, that's where my curiosity and relationship with the material exists, and in moving with it as well, and in understanding it through space-time and through motion. I think these pieces speak to, I think of structures. They are a structure. I lost my train of thought there. Yeah, no, I know. There's this connection that I constantly make with these that I always get caught up on. And the connection is that in the gesture of making a straight line, there is, with this material specifically, there is an understanding that the straight line won't be straight. And speaking specifically about the use of glass for this gesture, our knowledge of this material and the way that we encounter it in day-to-day life comes mainly from an industrial approach. We see a window pane that is completely flat, completely straight. We drink out of glass vessels that have been blown into a machine, and again, they're all consistent and carry this same energy. However, I thought we rarely encounter glass in this consistency specifically. And I think that what I approach with my work and my process is about interacting with our outside world in a way that will question our perception. And in the questioning of our perception, we can start to interact with the world and encounter the exterior in alternative ways. So I do believe that by presenting a material or a gesture in an alternative way, we are in the process of that a self-actualization, and it affects our lives and our interaction with nature and the way that we choose to exist. So another piece that I have in the show, it's right directly in front of this one, is a similar approach was made by stretching the same mass of glass into a straight line, however, letting it sag. And again, the materials want to do what they want to do. And I was not anticipating that the build out of an excess of material in the middle would create a drop. I was anticipating it would drop as a smooth line, and in that and in both pieces you can really see they're almost a personification. They become beings, and the material can take its own existence from that actual documentation through the interaction. And thinking of these pieces in relation to the show, when Mariken invited me to be part of it, Mariken and Kent, I thought that the work would really work amazingly together, because we're all touching upon very, very similar points and concepts in alternative ways. It's the idea of the skin. These are almost alter egos of actions, of impressions, of moments in time, and I got caught up there again.
So there are impressions of moments in time.
Yeah.
Alter egos.
Yeah, I was just thinking of it in relationship to the skin again. It's an alter ego is another identity, and the fact that these pieces take up so much space in the room, and they are life size. I see them as actual external skins, and almost a manifestation of that specific, what it took to manifest in that moment. These were made with the help of a dear friend called Emily, and we together synchronized our movements to be able to seamlessly make the pulls. And it probably took about 10 attempts to be able to make this piece successfully, because there is a very fine window, and that's where the title of these pieces come from, Finding the Window. And it's about also the translation, yes, finding the window of how hot glass has to be to actually stretch, but not too hot to completely drip on the floor, and to even make it into the cooling down oven to cool down slowly overnight. If glass cools down too fast at room temperature, it will completely shatter. So glass has to go through a very specific annealing, it's called slow cooling cycle, but also nailing that window from which the material stops moving, but you still have to put it away so it can cool down slowly, is part of the challenge. And that challenge of finding that specific window for this material also translates into, I think, our personal life, specifically my personal life, finding a balance between, so back to the alter ego, or the relationship between the earth and the skin, or Terra, Derma, which is the title of this exhibition. I think these touch upon the idea of being a being that has to exist in balance and harmony, while also being constantly pulled. These are pulls as well, so they were actually made by pulling the material, this is something that Kent mentioned earlier too, about the solidity or versus non-solidity of elements in nature. I constantly think of these as being able to capture both things simultaneously, because glass in an instant, it changes from one state of matter to another one, from liquid to solid instantly. It can capture that. It can capture the solidity versus fragility and polarity, which I think makes are human existent, but we cannot get caught up in polarity. We have to find a way to exist within the gray. Like darkness cannot exist without light, light cannot exist without darkness, but we exist in a gray world as well. So these are all constant thoughts that revolve around these pieces or this series of work, and I think it's the gesture that attempts to put all of those things together into a material form, or put all of those thoughts together, or manifest those thoughts in the material world. And in displaying them, which is the second time I install them in space, and every time the display changes a little bit, the more I interact with them, like I said, I see them as beings as well. They take on a new life, also depending on the space in which they're exhibited, because they, as glass, you can see through them. They're also, I guess, fragile, so you have to take so many things into consideration, but every time they take up their own life again. And these are displayed by hanging from just regular carbon wire with a rock. The rock is what is stabilizing them. And it also references that gravity, the gravitational force that as beings living on this planet we are completely affected by and dependent on. The other piece, the pull and the sag, is being held at an angle by an even larger stone, and in the intention of putting the stone in relation to them and supporting them and also stretching them, speaking about the process in which they were made. And also it keeps them alive, I feel. It keeps them active, animate, almost inanimate objects, because they are being held by something that is also being held by gravity and space. And something that I think is interesting to mention too is that the use of copper is the only material, the only metal that has the same coefficient of expansion as glass, which means that it expands and cools down at the same rate. So I wanted to address the contrast between the structure and non-structure, the organic, non-organic, the let's call it more like material versus spiritual. And the copper is it's a copper pipe. It's a machine-made, man-made, very straight and strict material to include that interestingly matches with the same thermal behavior that glass has, but also it was used as the tool to create the pools. So again, I think that adds to the relationship between the balance and the marriage between polarity as well. So.
Did you touch on? There's a lot of things I think you kind of brought together for the whole show in a way too. You were speaking about the polling of kind of like this process, right? So like you're freezing, your glass work is frozen in the pole, so it's like kind of like a picture of the process. Same with the Kent's is like kind of a picture of the process, and Marie's as well.
Yeah.
Maybe you want to speak to that a little bit, or?
Yeah, I guess that's another similarity about the work of the three of us is that we are. American mentioned that we're all process-based, and we all seek to capture that moment in time. In Kent's work, very literally, how paint crackles, and also how he embraces the surprise element. Like he mentioned earlier, that he did not anticipate that to crack in that specific way, and also temporality. I think we're all touching upon temporality, how he is not able to access that paint again. And what Marie can do with the gesture of burning the paper or burning the milkweed seeds, and in my case, or incorporating the veins of a tree. These are all very specific things that exist, and only exist in one. They're completely unique, only exist in one way, and this, in the same way, this type of pool won't ever be able to be replicated, no matter how many I make or how consistent I am. There are so many external factors that affect how the work is made and how it is created, that they are all very specific gestures within a moment of time that are talking about that temporality. Yeah.
I like how you mentioned too how it really summed up this work really well in the moment where you said that it was something about polling in different directions. You said something before that, like so many different elements happening at the same time. You kind of related that to maybe like one's life or I don't know, external forces kind of like trying to get your attention.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's something specific too about this process. And it might be a little selfish, but I feel that in the process of raising your own consciousness or awakening your own consciousness, you're also helping the entire universe. So I do find that to be able to successfully accomplish this task, I have to be very, very well balanced and in tune with myself and the material. And that means, like you were asking, canceling out the external, what's the word? The external environment, the external stimulus. That's what I was trying to get to, the external stimulus. And the external stimulus doesn't necessarily have to be external, as in someone walking by or someone saying something, or be a physical experience. The stimulus also comes from one's own mind. So I think in working with an external material that has its own pace, but also actively responds to your own, it's a way to be able to tune out or balance my own internal stimulus, to be able to be fully immersed in the moment, to be to exist between the place of control and letting go. And I feel that the more I exert that, the more I practice that, I am able to apply that in my own life as well. And yeah, I think the glass lends itself beautifully for that. And just a little note to put things in context. I was born and raised in Peru, and my maternal great-grandfather, my grandmother's father, was a glassblower who came from Italy in the, I would say, early 1900s, and was employed by someone who owned a factory, who then turned out to be my great-great-grandfather. And he had a factory where they blew glass bottles, and I guess milk bottles and jars and medicine bottles before the plastic industry. I did not have the pleasure of meeting him or see the factory ever. It closed, I think, I'd like to say between the 60s and the 70s. But I grew up with glass objects in my great-grandmother's home, because I did spend many years with her and learned a lot from her. And I remember very eagerly wanting to go to her house to just touch these things and interact with them. And then not knowing what it was or how it was made, I had no idea. And even the fact that my great-grandfather had made them didn't resonate with me so much until I got older and realized that a person could make that. Or that a material like that could be transformed, be so organic to be able to be manipulated, but also so rigid and then contain its form. So I think that's a thought I've had since I was a child, and I've spent the last 10 years learning about the material too, and then finding opportunities to be able to finally have the access to do this. So, yeah.
Well, do you guys have questions for me as well?
More like it's really interesting to hear how I think all of us explore the material and use material in ways that it's not originally meant or seen or experienced. And I think all three of us are very tactile, and
Yes.
it's really interesting to kind of hear that more. And also I think it's a certain sense of solitude, or
Yes.
and withdrawing and coming out is very interesting to hear
Yeah.
about.
Yeah, I think so too, and maybe I'll just say something about that so it's recorded. It's easier when I don't realize I'm on the spot. But yeah, no, I think that's exactly what it is. I think we're all treating the material in ways that they're not necessarily supposed to be manipulated, and we all have a very tactile approach to them as well, and a practice of solitude where we are having this very personal, intimate relationship with the work, kind of going inwards to then go outwards as well. And I think in my case specifically, that comes from research of how I think we're living at times where things that we took for granted, specifically when it comes to knowledge and facts and how society is structured, I think that we're living in a time where those values are being deconstructed, and where everyone is having to come to basically rebuild what we existed our entire lives believing. And because I come from South America, that was even the States, but I think the States, it's becoming more prevalent now, but we come from a very colonial culture that now it's accepted because it's the norm. But just going back to the roots, I think my attempt of working and deconstructing these established ways of working with material or established conventions comes from a very post-colonial approach where we're questioning what is our society built upon, basically. So in these gestures with materials in different ways, I think we're all touching upon those ideas as well, like building our own language and our own way of expression from our intimate interaction, from our own experience.
I think that's true for artists in general.
Yeah.
Everyone trying to interpret or emit, your expression that's unique to you and is different from everyone else, but
Yeah.
still relates in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think so
I
too.
don't have any questions for you. I think you did a good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.